started. Thank you all for coming. No one wants to sit in the front row, so that's okay. Like, walk along the front, pound on desks. Just to be perfectly honest with you, this is just a mastermind discussion, so there's not a real presentation or anything like that that we're gonna go through. So very much dependent on participation from all of you. This is gonna be one of those opportunities where you can tell the stories of things that have happened to you so that the rest of us can benefit from them. I've been in real estate for 29 years. I've had a couple stories that have happened to me that I can share with you, but I have a couple others from agents that are more recent, and how those situations came about and how they worked out for the benefit of the group. The idea behind this is for agents to get comfortable with how they respond to questions from sellers and buyers now about what fees you charge and whether or not you'll negotiate those. Because who hasn't been asked that question? And if you haven't, it's coming. It's gonna happen to you. I will say in almost 29 years now, I've probably only been asked a handful of times whether or not I would negotiate my commission. That has surprised me. I've expected to have that conversation with people more and more often, and especially with buyer agency agreements coming up now. It's still kind of the same for me. So I had to reflect on why I think that's the case. So think about yourselves in this same scenario. Do I come across as somebody that wouldn't negotiate? Or somebody that wouldn't be flexible? Or that they wouldn't feel like they could ask me or approach me? I would say that might be true. I mean, if I'm gonna be really honest, would they feel like they might offend me if they asked me to negotiate that commission? Maybe that's why I haven't been asked 5 times. I don't know. It's possible. So you have to look at yourself, and we want you to get to the position where you're confident enough and comfortable enough in what you do for a living and what you charge for that to stand your ground when somebody asks you whether or not you'll do it for less. Because this is your job. Just like when you're hiring somebody to do stuff at your own house, it's their job. It's how they remember.
So let me ask you a question, Carey.
Sure.
Do you think, have you ever experienced where you have lost a listing where they have not asked you to lower your commission, but your suspicion is that perhaps somebody you competed with had a lower commission?
To be 100% honest, because I try to make sure that I analyze why I didn't win in a situation, whether it's a listing or purchase agreement, and always try to be self-critical of what could have worked out different. So in that scenario, Tom, I'm probably more likely to think that I could have done a better job on presenting my value. I cannot recall a time where I didn't get a listing after being asked to negotiate the commission.
Okay.
So
But
I'm
do you
not really
think,
confused on that.
yeah, so the problem, of course, is that you don't necessarily know what the other
Correct.
agents.
I don't know if it came down to commission.
Correct.
Yeah.
And has anybody ever told you that it came down to commission?
No.
So that's very interesting.
And
Okay.
again, we're only talking about a handful of times in a lot of years.
But I'm talking about when you've lost, though. You've lost more than a handful, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But only been asked specifically about commission a handful of times.
Right. But I'm wondering on the times that you lost, if that was the deciding factor that they didn't show.
Yeah, I have a tendency to believe, have always felt that it was because of my value wasn't high enough, my comps weren't good enough. Know that there was always something that I could have done differently in the valuation or the market analysis, or even just sitting down and talking to them. You know, did I not get to the point where they felt like they could trust me?
Sure.
Or that my value was. I lost one recently. I'm really not sure why. I think it was overvalued because they did list it for $100,000 more than I suggested that they list it for. And it sold for $80,000 more than I suggested that they list it for too. So I was definitely wrong.
Yeah.
But I didn't immediately think it came down to commission because we never talked about negotiating commission. And I also believed I should have followed up. I found other reasons that I felt like I could have done a better job to get that listing. people I knew personally also. So that's a good question. And if you've had a situation where that happened to you and you know that it came down to commission, anybody in the room?
I've had a couple where, I mean, there's a book I read too that talks about, are you agent one or are you agent two? Like when you first talk to these people to kind of get information, you can usually fish out the information like you're who they're going to use or you're their backup. That they're just kind of using verified information. Once I kind of figured that out, it made more sense. Because a lot of them already have talked to someone who will do a lower commission or they already have a price in mind. And once I really start fishing that out, I've had several like, well, so-and-so will do this like for 4.5. Would you do that? I'm like, I don't do that. And I just set the standard number, but I too have had very, very few people ask me. I even have a pretty high BAC fee. I raised it this year to pay for my transaction coordinator. And I've had not one person in the last couple of years ever ask about discounting that either, what that's for, so.
I think they can definitely tell when you are
Confident.
unsure. Yeah, if you're unsure about your own fee or feel, if it puts you on the defensive immediately, people can sense that. We can sense that in other people.
And I generally don't even bring it up anymore. And if they ask, we'll talk about it, but it seems like most people generally don't ask.
So that was gonna be my next question. By a show of hands, sorry, I'm just,
Okay, no.
by a show of hands, how many people address commission in their listing presentation?
Only if asked.
Interesting.
Just when going through the listing agreement so that they, I mean, it's on there.
Well, listing
Yeah.
agreement, you have to, yeah.
So that's the only time.
So Jay, since you don't go through it, you don't specifically go through the listing agreement?
No, I do. We get to it, but it's never like when I'm sitting down to meet you,
Right,
we don't, if they ask, we definitely talk about it. And I have added in where commissions are divided by 4 different groups and how that works.
sure,
And I just always say, it's a 6% commission when we get to that point.
right,
6% commission, and I'm very blunt about it. I'm like, 3.6 comes to me, and then I'll even tell them my split. Like in this piece of the money I'm getting, I don't get all of that. This goes to the brokerage. On the other side, they're doing the same thing. So 4 people are taking this little pot of money. But that's when we're looking at the one sheet. Usually not in our first.
I was gonna say.
so that's not your first meeting, so how many of you think it makes more sense to provide a listing presentation and not go over the mechanics of some of those documents such as net sheets and those? Do you think it should be a 2-tiered listing process? Is that more effective?
Lead with value.
Okay,
That's what I've heard is that you just lead with, hey, this is everything that I provide. This is what I'm going to do for you, take care of you. And then commission always comes last because once you've told them everything you're going to do for them, then hopefully you are bringing enough value to the table that they're not going to question it.
When I learned from a couple people that I consider like mentors. Also, not to lay everything out on the table on the first go round. I've been burned by that where I said, we'll do this and we'll stage this and we'll move this and we'll move that. And I drove home and there was a for sale by owner sign in the yard. And I'm like, and I told them how we're going to price it. So I think leaving some stuff out to keep your value, like keep them coming to you, definitely helps.
Unexpected extras.
so in that circumstance, maybe you're having a conversation about all the different value that you bring, but you're not necessarily disclosing all the answers. Right, you can do those can be mutually exclusive, right? So instead of saying, I would stage this room this way, and this way, or our staging consult will likely indicate this, and this. And oh, by the way, there's 37 comps here that have sold in the last 6 months, and the median is this, and this. Maybe say, you talk about the process, you talk about the value that you provide, but you say, now, after I've had an opportunity to look at your house, then we'll talk about the specifics of the strategy. But these are the certain, yeah, correct.
And I learned that from Stacy.
Yeah.
It's like after they signed the paperwork, and they agreed to work with me, then we're gonna go through all of that on the second.
But I think arguably it's important for them to understand and appreciate the value that you intend to bring relative to those services and that business acumen. Because that's how you're gonna win their hearts and minds. But to Jay's point, which is interesting, Cause I think some of us maybe don't do that, which I think it makes sense. You don't wanna necessarily leave everything on the table because it could be to your detriment. I think that's an interesting point.
I wanna ask one thing and then go back to Skylar, cause he had his hand raised. I used to, and don't anymore, have a full marketing plan that I included in the market analysis. But I don't have it in there anymore. I mean, a little more old school way back when, but, so that would tell them everything you were gonna do to it. Every MLS it was going into, where it was gonna be advertised, everything. And I don't have that upfront at all anymore. And I do a 2-stage where it's valuation, look at the property and valuation first, and then listing is separate appointment. Skylar?
I was just gonna say, I've only had a few listings, but the number, like, after I go over everything, the number one question right away every time, except for one time, has been, what is your commission?
Really?
Each time.
And how does that make you feel when they ask you that question?
No problem, and I charge this much, and same thing they said.
But how many times have you cut your commission?
Now, Emily's putting you on the spot here, not me.
The only reason I'm asking is because you made a really good,
Okay.
you made a good point. That I think would help all of us, and it was, I can't remember exactly what you said, but something about if you lead defensively, they're going to feel that.
Shows that weakness, right?
Yes, and then you're gonna feel nervous. I mean, every time a seller's asked me straight up what's your commission, and you can tell they're like, that's really all they care about. And every time I've gotten nervous, I've ended up cutting my commission, cause I'm nervous and yeah, and I think that
One of my favorite lines, and it'll be ripped off from other people, is I will be as firm with my money as I am with your money for a seller.
Yes.
Because that really, I mean, that weakness doesn't just appear when we're talking about your own commission. It's anything. Are you so desperate for a listing or sale that you're just willing to throw everything out the window and make it happen? So,
I'll be a good steward of your money. And more importantly, I'll be a good steward within the negotiation of presenting the value of your proposition versus theirs. And I
I
think
learned
that,
from Tom too, I think we don't have to cut your commission like 1%. That's part of the reason I have a higher BAC fee. It's just psychological, so mine is $750. And I'll just say, you know what, I'll go ahead and drop my BAC fee to $399. And how's that help?
so it appears you're negotiating.
It appears like I'm giving them a significant amount of money, which sounds bigger than like 1% or 0.5%. So they'll just like, oh, that's nice of you. And Tom was the one that told me early on, I don't have to drop 1%. I think that's where a lot of us in the beginning were. It's like, if you charge 6, I'll do it for 5. Do it for 5.25, or do it for 5.5. You don't have to go down the whole percent. That's a big difference too.
Right.
and you can also talk about dollars. So if you have think about it in these terms, if you have a $500,000 listing and they, and look like they're really value conscious, right? And let's say, so 6% is 30 grand, right? 5% is 25,000. What if you said to them, in the interest of our relationship and the fact that you were referred by your brother, I'm going to go ahead and discount this commission $3,000. That sounds a lot more than 0.5%, doesn't it? Or 0.6%.
Sure.
So the other thing that I've done, and you guys are probably sick of hearing this stuff, but the other thing that I've done that I think is really important and can be and it's totally legal. There is nothing smoke and mirrors. It is absolutely been vetted through the real estate commission, is to tier the commission based on the sale price.
Yeah.
So, which is also an incremental strategy. So instead of going, for example, to Jay's point, straight to 5 or even 5.5, you could say, well, look, if we get 350,000, let's say it's listed, or higher, it's 6%. We get 345, or up from 340 to 345, it's 5.75, and so on and so forth. And the reason, and then I think what's valuable to people is you say, and the reason I want to do this is not because I want to necessarily not get 6%. I want to get 6%, but I want you to understand that I'm your partner and that our success is intrinsically unified. And that is, which is true, right? Because if your compensation, if your compensation is 6% and they get 6,000 less dollars for the house, that's nothing, right? That's $360 and you're getting presumably 60% of that, right? But if your compensation drops, that they eat 5,000 and then all of a sudden you eat 1,500 right there with them, and you can use that example in the conversation, then you're partners. Because you don't, because the problem is that when the price goes down substantially in a normal environment, you know, on the listing, so 10 grand to them is only $360 to you, right? But if you have a tiered commission structure and 10 grand to them, it might be 2 grand to you or 3 grand to you. And if you explain it in those terms and say, and that's why I'm investing in staging. That's why I'm investing in a staging consult. That's why you know, I'm gonna go ahead and pay for drone photography because we're partners and this process needs to have integrity. And it's my job to get you the highest and the best value. And so the way I can do that is put my money where my mouth is. That for me has worked because it's compelling.
I'll tell you the time it worked for me. I don't like to do the commission state leveling just because I'm simple and I don't like to think it through. But I did have to do it once. It is complicated, but no, but it works. The one time I did it, it worked out very well for me. And that was, it was in the height of the pandemic and I was putting this grand historic house on the market. We had no idea where it was gonna go. So, and they were very budget conscious, so we put it on the market for $695 and we did a tiered commission, whereas if it was less, it was 6%, because that's what I charge. And then it was going down to 5%, and that was about the lowest or anything. But then we started going the other direction. And he said, we put on the market for $695, and he said, well, what if it hits 800? I said, what if it hits at 800? And he goes, I'll pay you 7%, and I'll give you a $20,000 bonus. And I got that. So we sold it, we put it on the market for $695. This was like 20, where he just didn't know where it was gonna go.
Right.
And it sold for $810. I got 7% and a $20,000 bonus. And that was, so why don't I do it more? Cause I'm still single. And I still.
That's a great point because I haven't ever taken advantage of that, of
Well,
the
you've never
other
gone up.
great big upside. No,
We didn't know.
but it's a great point
Yeah.
because it's,
We won together, is the words we used.
You could do it on timing too, how many days it's on the market and scale it that way. So that the more aggressively they price it and the sooner it sells, the bigger benefit it is to them. I mean, there's lots of different ways to look at this scenario. Scatter.
I was gonna say, unfortunately, I have cut my commission once. And it was because he has multiple, and so how do you get around that?
Multiple offers.
No, multiple units to sell.
Oh.
I'll say as an experienced agent, I do that.
Yeah.
I think, if you have an investor who has multiple properties and it's repeat business, you have to work with them in whatever that looks reasonable to you. I'm not gonna throw what that number is, but yes, that's the times when you do need to do it.
That's a good time for the BAC fee to come into play. So.
I have one client, she gets 5.5% for everything.
Okay.
and here's the thing about percentages. Percentages don't mean shit. They just don't. Because they're nothing more than that. So we have a tendency in the industry to get really oriented towards the, God, that card has been up there for a long time. It's been up there forever. I think for like a week we opened.
I never even noticed that.
Yeah, it's really.
Our Aegis guys are coming.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, so that's going down today.
That's great.
Say goodbye.
How about, okay, bye. Anyway.
I know.
So the reason I say that is that, you know, and I don't want to get into the mindset of, you know, a discount broker. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting is that we spend dollars. Dollars pay for college tuition, dollars pay for mortgages, dollars pay for trips, dollars pay for utility bills, percentages down. So you have to think about it in terms of the value of the relationship, what you're gonna have to invest in the property, how reasonable the candidate is relative to what they're pricing the property at.
Where your sign might be. I
Right.
take that into consideration too. Sometimes that alone is worth it.
Yeah, so I think that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be setting a high standard. If the market's at, X amount, we should be right there or higher. Everybody in here has the ability, the resources, the skill set, the brand, the company to support the best of the best. That said, we have to be cognizant of the economic condition that it's providing and affording us. For example, if you have a house that's 150,000 and they can do nothing for, nothing to it, and you are gonna have to inevitably have your cleaner go, inevitably do some landscaping the day before, inevitably do this and inevitably do that, then it seems foolish to price that at, less than 6% or maybe less than 7% in that instance. But on the other hand, if you have a house that is fantastic and $1 million and it could be $1.2 million and they just say, I just want to get rid of it, it's $1 million and it's pristine and you don't have to do, and it's, their furniture is nicer than any staging, it's just fantastic. And all you have is a couple grand in marketing to get it done. Would I walk away from that at 5? No, because, you have to, I think what's important to do too in every transaction is you have to have a P&L and you have to take your time into account and take all your operating expenses for that account, for that transaction, and making sure all we have to sell is our reputation and our time. So what kind of return on time, what kind of business development expense and time did we have in that opportunity? And what kind of return did we get on our investment relative to our time and our investment? And so I'm not saying that means you should list $1 million property at 5%, might need to be 7%, but we need to be cognizant of the fact that we have dollars and not every situation, dollars are what we spend and what we earn, and not every situation is created equal. That's where I think we get a little trapped in our industry around percentages, because it's one factor in numerous circumstances to derive how you should price your service.
It is also scary though, at the same time, to be like, you're gonna pay me $20,000. It's a little easier to say, you're gonna pay me 6%,
Look at it.
3% than saying, yeah, sometimes it is.
Well, I'm
scary.
not saying you say the dollar amount. I'm not purporting that. I'm saying that you should price your service based on what you are earning. I'm not saying you're not, just to be clear,
No, yeah.
I'm not telling you to go in there and go, my commission is gonna be 38,000. No, don't do that.
That's what's going on in here.
Don't do that. What I'm saying is that when you're doing your internal analysis,
Yeah.
that you're evaluating things in terms of what kind of return are you getting on your time, theoretically, based on experience, and what investment are you gonna have to make, and how profile, could that stimulate, is that an area you want to farm or something? Could that stimulate some opportunity? So all I'm saying is that a percentage is just one factor or one consideration in a whole host of other circumstances that you should evaluate when you're listing a property to determine what's reasonable for you from a compensatory perspective.
What Emily's just said is what happens in a lot of our heads, not a lot of our consumer though, is this is a $20,000 opportunity for me. What am I willing to do to get this listing?
Yeah.
Will I do my job for X amount of dollars? Sometimes that number varies a little bit. But I do want to tell you a quick story about an agent in the council bus office, which that doesn't really matter where she was because it's still real estate. She still does lots of business. So she did a market analysis on a listing. She was one of 10 agents that did a market analysis on. Not, a nice property, but not anything really super unusual. Acreage, subdivision. She was the first of 10 agents that went in. She called me after they had done all meetings with the agents that looked at it and said, they have called me and asked me if I will cut my commission. And she wasn't calling me and asking me for permission. She just wanted to think this through out loud, which is what we did. And she did not want to cut her commission. She ultimately did not, but she didn't want to. And she said, they admittedly told me I did more work than anybody else and by far was the best agent and that they really wanted to hire her. However, everybody else, 9 other agents immediately cut their commission 1 full percent. Now, she didn't know who she was going up against or how many people until after the fact. She knew who 1 or 2 of them was. She was even surprised that they did that, given who she knew it was. Ultimately, they ended up listing stocks with her because they wanted to hire her. And she ended up getting her full commission. All she had to do was feel confident in that she was charging her fee based on the services she provides, her expertise, her knowledge. We were talking a little bit earlier about all the things you have to know, in addition to how to fill out a purchase agreement, how to do a market analysis, all the other things that you have to know. That's what they are paying for. It's not just how long that house is gonna have sign in the yard and that you're gonna have pictures taken and uploaded in the MLS. All that experience and knowledge base that you have is also of value. Sometimes you haven't been around terribly long and you don't have a lot of that, but you probably also have some other things you're better at than people my age at. Tom, were you gonna say something?
No, I just say, you know, every time I've ever got 3 bids and I've taken the lowest one, like on a painter or an electrician
Pay
or
for
a
it,
plumber.
yeah. Read it.
I have a building I built, I won't talk about who the contractors were. I had a building I renovated one time. And the bid was $1 million for the renovation. And one bid was 900, and one bid was 1 million, and one bid was 1,050,000. And in my infinite wisdom, I went with 900. And by the time I got done with it, it was 1,050,000. Because I had to go back and we had to fix all the things that they, you know, waterproofing in the basement and yada, yada, yada. It was an old building. So, you know, I think that analogy is helpful when, if you're trying to hold your value, is that, you know, I may be not a Rolls Royce, but I might be a Mercedes. So, you know, you can have fun with it, right?
I like to describe it as dating.
Yeah.
There's a lot of similarities here. You're going to potentially date a seller, or they're gonna date their real estate agent, depending on how you're presenting this. 3 or 4 months, maybe longer, maybe 2 weeks, who knows? But you can't just date the best looking person in the room, because we all know how that works out. They are not the best personality match, their lifestyles don't match up, their communication sucks. I mean, there's 10,000 reasons why picking the best looking person in the room doesn't work. It's the same scenario for a real estate agent.
Thank God.
You're gonna
That's
be-
so.
Good.
You just made my whole day. There's a chance.
Oh my
But
gosh.
it's just a relationship example that they can relate to, because they don't think at that minute about how much time they're gonna be spending with you as a real estate agent. Honest to God, you should pick somebody you at least like, because you're going to be talking to them. They're gonna be in your house. They're going to be making phone calls. They're gonna be talking to the people that are interested in your house. That's almost more important than the fee that you charge. So
Well, it's
at
just
least
like
be
doctors. What about the analogy we all know, right? About the doctor, lawyer,
Oh, yeah.
you know, do you want open heart surgery by the cheapest doctor? I mean, I don't know what the statistic is, maybe it's outdated. I remember at one point somebody said 90% of people, their primary residence is their greatest asset. So when you're talking about really 1%, let's say, is the greatest number, mostly, sometimes it's 1.5. But if you think about that in terms of what kind of risk you're willing to take based on confidence. So I think the conversation that I've had is, right,
Justify. You
It-
have to be
it's-
able to justify.
I would even say to them honestly, if it's a coin flip, if you're really happy with either one and you feel very good about both of them, then you probably should go with the least expensive. But if you think there's a differentiation between the skill sets for a minuscule amount relative to the percentage, why would you create the opportunity for your greatest asset to be underserved? It just doesn't make sense.
If it's only truly about the money, which some people will tell you it is, if it's only truly about the money, then pick the cheapest person. But I think that just plants that seed of doubt that maybe I should be thinking about something other than just the money.
Yeah.
Because like I said, there's people are in your life now for 3 or 4 months potentially. I do want to tell you one more story. And now, did you have something you were saying?
So yeah, I was gonna read Raquel's comment,
Oh,
and
sure.
she said, if you don't feel that you're worth what you're charging, how do you expect your client to feel that?
Yeah.
Great point.
Correct, yep, and that's part of why we have this discussion today, is so that you feel comfortable with the fees that you charge for the job that you do, and like I say, loading your lip, so when that question comes across, being caught off guard is one of the worst things, you're not prepared to answer that question. So we want you to be prepared for that. I brought a couple things that I'll go over here in a minute, but the other story I wanted to tell you was about an agent, and this is more related to the buyer agency side of it. Our agent, our listing, the seller is an investor that has flipped this property. First of all, she sold him the house, or she found him that house, and he bought it without paying any commission on it at all. Connected the two parties, did him a favor, because she knows he's gonna buy and sell multiple properties. She's worked with him before. He gets ready to put this house on the market, lists it with her, offers listing side commission. Typical, what she would want, but doesn't offer any buyer agency. So our policy here is it's 2.4, it's 0. So it's 0. And he said, I just have issue with the agents are gonna make more money on this house than I am. And that was, and he's numbers, it's truly just about numbers. So she puts it on the market. The first 4 agents that show it don't ask about commission. Nobody asks about commission. And I've seen that happen quite a bit lately. I was talking to another agent, lots of listings. She said, nobody asked me whether or not there's compensation anymore, because they know they're gonna write it into the purchase agreement. Well, that's what happened with this scenario. It was a PJ Morgan agent wrote an offer on the property, wrote in buyer agent compensation in the purchase agreement, and the seller countered it back with a higher price and the amount he would pay, which was less than what she was asking for. So their numbers were, $8,000 apart roughly. I think he countered hers back at $2,500, just a flat amount, not a percentage, which was less than 1.5%, truthfully. So that went back and forth, and that buyer's agent was adamant that she was not going to take less than 2.4 was what she asked for in the original purchase agreement. So now she is standing in between her buyers buying this house and her commission, which is a position I don't ever want to be in. So the reason I bring this up today is so that you are prepared for that scenario, or prevent it, which is what she could have done if she had asked about buyer agency. She may never have shown him that house to start with. Again,
Of course, that would be for the client to decide.
yes, it would
Because
be.
we can't steer based
She
on
may not have
compensation.
shown it to them. That
Well-
would, she wouldn't have, but they could have gone to anybody else or the listing agent and looked at the property.
But theoretically, the other topic or issue with this of consequence there is that person could have signed a buyer agency agreement, which theoretically they would
I
have.
believe they had.
Yeah, so let's say that they had an exclusive buyer agency agreement, which is what I think most people are getting executed. And that said 2.4%, then that's an issue where she would have to have agreed to amend that.
And she would not.
Right.
She would not. She was adamant about this. So I'll skip ahead to how this works out, because the seller is also adamant about how much money he is willing to pay in commissions total. He is not gonna have the agents make more money than he is. He repeatedly says this. And he's a nice guy. He's not a jerk. And our listing agent is getting very frustrated. She's kind of mad because she's been put in this position. And I said, this is the basis of the buyer agency lawsuit, is that seller never felt like he had an opportunity to negotiate paying the buyer's agent. I said, this is exactly why we're in the situation we're in. So don't get mad at him. He's taken advantage of what he can now do that he should have always been able to do. We all said he was able to do that, but never really wanted them to do that. So he ends up still offers his $2,500. The the listing agent and I have a conversation about actual dollars. This was a $9,000 commission to her. Do you want to offer part of your listing compensation to the buyer's agent? Part. 0.4, I think is what we were talking about. So she'd still earn 3% on her side of it. And she decided that she would keep that bargaining chip in her pocket and see how close she could get them together on the other side of it. So the price got raised, the compensation got raised, and she ended up kicking in her 0.4%. And the buyer's agent finally agreed to that. That's what it came down to. Now we gotta hope the darn thing appraises for what they added on to the top of it too. It's got.
Is she going to from now on charge him on the buying side to understand that he got in that position?
He does know it. I mean, cause you have to tell him, right? Cause what if he wanted to take it back? What if he wanted to reduce his $2,500 now, knowing that she was gonna kick in 0.4?
But I'm also saying, so she brought him a deal,
Yes,
and then charged him to get in the door to make that deal,
yes.
and then was mad and saying that agents don't deserve to make more, but
Make more than he was making.
make more than he was making, but he wouldn't be in the position to be calling the shots if it wasn't for that agent.
Right.
So is she now
You're
going
totally
to?
right.
So I'm
On all
saying,
that.
is now she going to start charging him at least
He has-
something
he
to
has-
find these deals, or?
Yeah, she'll probably never do that again. That situation was, she was almost helping the people out that were selling the house
Right.
more than she was helping him out. She went to him because she knew he would buy it.
Okay, that makes sense.
And they just needed a cash sale and to get out of it. So, she didn't necessarily do him the favor.
Do
but
like a
she
bunch
did
of-
know
yeah,
he was
okay.
the guy that would step in and buy it, and
That
he
makes
did.
more
There
sense.
just wasn't a lot of room in that house he went over budget on the reno on it. And so anyway, so that one worked out. Buyer's agent did not get her full amount, but close enough that she decided she wasn't gonna be the obstacle anymore. And, but I thought that was interesting because of the buyer agency situation. Now, there are a couple other agents that also work with this investor. I have in the past, but not lately. And he also has an agent at Berkshire Hathaway that came to an open house over there and is talking to our agent saying, I'm not gonna do business with him anymore. If he won't pay buyer agency compensation, I'm just not gonna deal with him. I'm not gonna take him deals. I'm not gonna do anything with him. I said, well, she showed him, didn't she? You think he cares? He does not care. He'll find 10 other real estate agents that'll go bring him deals. And I said, that's to me the wrong mindset to have about an investor that is truly in the business to make money.
But I do think, devil's advocate, I do think, this is just my opinion. I do think that, I don't know what it's saying, my text, I'm trying to say, God, but I do think that there needs to be a conversation with the seller to make them understand that when you don't offer compensation, it does limit, because sometimes the buyer will self-deselect. Because the buyer, because they're obligated to pay the 2.4,
That may have happened. in
they will
this case.
self-deselect. So while I agree that we have to be sensitive to the fact that that's what the lawsuit was about, I would and I don't disagree with anything that you said, but I would respectfully submit that I think over time and over the swath of long periods of time and lots of circumstances, when you get down to the median, sellers are hurting themselves, not helping themselves with that mentality.
Sure.
Economic.
Now in this situation, it would be hard to convince him of that, right? Cause he got what he wanted in the end. He got everything he wanted in the end.
Well, okay, but did he? What about
Unless something goes wrong.
well, wait a minute though. What about the person that maybe didn't write the offer that would have been $5,000 higher? What about that person? You know, I mean, all this is an exercise potentially in reducing the market opportunity. So if there is a buyer or a buyer's agent or the collectivity of their relationship, given the buyer agent commission and what have you, that divorce themselves from the process because of his approach, which I would say is less than 2 to 3% of the market, probably less, 2% maybe. So he's at a competitive disadvantage from what the expectation is.
And
I would just respectfully submit that I think over time,
you're absolutely right.
right.
Knowing him though, in this scenario, he believes that's the route he's gonna take from now on, going forward with every agent he lists with. He'll tell that story to his investor friends. I just know he will,
Yeah,
but it remains to be seen how it actually works out. Does it appraise? And the other thing, if you're in that position where you take a listing where they're not offering buyer agency compensation, that as a listing agent, you 100% have to make sure that every single showing knows there is zero buyer agency compensation offered, so that they have that conversation with their buyers before they come and fall in love with the house.
I call every one of them still. I think I'm one of the few people that, when I represent buyers, I text every house we're gonna show, unless it's like Berkshire Hathaway where we
I
know
check
that.
on them all too.
I always do, and I tell my client, I just closed one, it was a for sale by owner, she was paying $3,500. Had to go back to my buyers and say, okay, the difference on this is $5,000, I'll just round it to 5,000. And they were like, okay, that was fine, and we did it, it's a pain paperwork wise.
And
Right.
that story that I told, that buyer didn't have the capability to do that.
Yeah.
They didn't have the extra money to do it.
Yeah.
How many have said
I have
no?
one more question.
How many have said no?
This is like the first one I've had.
No
This is
listing agents when you call to ask if there's buyer's compensation.
Very few.
None have said
it's
no.
1 or 2%.
None have said no, and maybe a
All
couple
next-
offered like 2.
All next door and all EXP do not offer as a company
Yeah,
policy.
Yeah, but,
they'll answer.
yeah, but they do. They say they don't.
It's to have.
No, but here's the thing though. Here's the thing, cause I just had a contract come over where all they did was X out. Even on the buyer side, I just had this last night. They sent over the contract, so somebody called me and sends over this text with the purchase agreement. All they did was X out. They were the buyer's agent, by the way. So they're getting, which I just, I'm not gonna, in my opinion, of blended, whatever his face is, but he crosses it out. Okay, they cross out
In the purchase agreement, they're
in
crossing out
the
buyer
purchase
agent.
agreement, they cross out the segment of the paragraph 31 that says seller directs broker to pay.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to say, or seller will pay. So what's happened, and I think this is very important to note, what's happened is they started with the notion, and I'll just call it out, I don't normally, but I am today. EXP, they started with the notion that they were never gonna pay, they were gonna encourage everybody to be zero and it would be negotiated. Now they've softened into, well, it's just not gonna go through the brokerage. If the seller wants to pay, they can pay, but we're not gonna do it. Because what happened is they started to get their teeth kicked in because that's not where the market is.
Yeah, people. were
That's
ripping
not the
off
hearts and minds of the
EXP.
marketplace. And I absolutely agree that because of the lawsuit, we have to say zero if they want it to be zero. We have to, but we don't have to take the list. And I'm not disagreeing with anything that Carey said. I think this is important to have dialogue and have back and forth. Carey's smart and very, very good at what she does. That's why she's standing up there. And I don't disagree with the premise that guy can work with 28 different realtors.
It's just reality.
Yeah, that's a
In my
reality.
opinion.
That's a reality, but I don't know.
I'm-
I don't know that it helps. I don't know that it ultimately, and we may never win that guy over. But my moral high ground on this, and then I'll shut up, would be that we need to protect these sellers from themselves. That's my opinion,
Yeah.
because they're hurting themselves.
He happens to be a seller that thinks he knows more than
Yeah.
everybody else.
I bet he does.
No,
I bet he
he
does.
thinks he does. And I sold his personal residence, not one of his flips, and he was fine to work with on that.
Yeah,
It's kind of,
So when you're working with somebody like that, and that's the route and angle they wanna take, you then tell them, okay, there was no juice in here to squeeze out for a buyer's agency agreement, but on the next one I find you where you're gonna make 60 grand, you pay me 9%. Or what do you do?
yeah, why not? I mean, it's negotiable, right? It's negotiable up, it's negotiable down.
No, I'm just saying, how would you handle somebody like that? Like, would you then be like, okay, look, I just.
To me,
Okay,
it's the
there's
same
only-
conversation with your customers that you know are gonna have multiple properties. He's a multiple property guy.
Right, right.
He's gonna be,
So then maybe
you
not
create a
9%, but
package for him that you both agree upon, that you think is fair, and
go from there.
I mean, right now, you couldn't convince him he needs to pay buyer, he'd rather negotiate because it worked out to his advantage.
Right.
So he may.
So he
continue to do
thinks.
that. Yes.
So he thinks.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, if you got a buyer that you don't know if it's gonna appraise and you know they don't have any extra cash, if it doesn't appraise, he's gonna.
That's what the listing agent and I talked about. Now that everybody that hits the door is gonna know there's zero. That's gonna knock out some people that will not be able to pay buyer agency compensation. Or he did offer something up. So are you willing to accept it for what he might offer up to a buyer's agent? So it was an interesting scenario. She was okay with it, like not mad at him anymore by the time they got to the end of it. But I said, have this conversation with him. What if it doesn't appraise? What's gonna happen now? Are you gonna reduce the price? The commission's already set, you know, all of these, work this out till the end with him. So that he only has to have this conversation with you and not every other agent that he lists properties with. Maybe he'll just keep coming back to you. And maybe she doesn't want him to. We'll see how it works out. He's a decent guy to work for, but that's all he does is flip properties. So like you're gonna say something.
Just saying there's a dime a dozen investors out there too. at the
Yeah,
same
there
time.
are.
I don't know, I
Some
just,
of them are savvy and smart and really good at it, and some of them are floundering and figuring it out.
yeah, some make really good money.
Not hitting the
New
wall
carpet and
stunts.
painting and make 15 grand and it's like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
there's a little bit of market for everybody for that. So, how much time do we have? 10 minutes? I have, this is a questionnaire. Actually, I had questions from Jackie too. This is a questionnaire, some of you are probably familiar with Dave Ramsey. They have a questionnaire that they provide. It's an agent interview worksheet. So some of these questions are things you may get asked that really, in my opinion, add up what you charge, what your fee is. How long have you been a full-time agent in my market? How many homes do you close each year? Will you be my primary point of contact as opposed to an assistant or somebody else? What certifications set you apart from other agents? Will you help me or buy or sell a home in this market? What's your fee? Interestingly enough, they have answers typed out on this that have 6% in it. That says typically 6%. I thought, really? But Ramsey's aren't realtors, so. Do I have to sign a contract? Can I cancel without penalty? How will you communicate with me? What are your realistic expectations for house hunting in this market? Who can I contact for a reference? Do you have people ask you for references? I don't think I ever have.
But how many of you provide testimonials in your listing packet? Testimonials are really valuable, I think. I know it's old school and seems archaic, but I do think people like to hear people say good things about people they're doing business.
Reassuring, especially if you're trying to decide between a couple people.
Especially if they live in the same neighborhood. Testimonials are awesome.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Go ask your neighbor in the corner. I sold their old house and got them this. See what they think.
I think we all agree too that a bad experience carries so much more weight than a good experience. Like bad news travels fast. I mean, if you go out and look at reviews on anything that you're looking at, you're only looking at the bad one. I skip straight to the bad ones because I wanna assess how bad it was.
Yeah.
Was that person realistic about their expectations? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah.
Sometimes the things that they complained about were beyond the properties. It's usually Airbnbs or VRBOs.
Yeah.
To see what they had to say about them, beyond their control. When you're discussing the services you offer as a real estate professional, what are a few that you highlight? The obvious things we know, market analysis, trust. Anybody have special things or unique things about yourself that you highlight to customers that you want to share?
I always say that me and Skylar are kind of a 2-for-1er kind of situation. So I just say my husband's a realtor.
Yep.
And sometimes I even throw in my dad, like we're like a family of realtors and that we're all here to help you, you know, although I'm your agent, you know, if there's something I can't do
You'll
or
always be able to reach somebody.
yeah.
That is a key point too. One of the things that people care about too is how available you're going to be. Do you have another job? That's why that question says full-time. Or are you not available to answer your phone from
I've
8 to
gotten
5
that
every
question.
day?
The full-time one, I got that question a lot, the full-time one, which shocked me the first time I heard it. I was like, are you a full-time agent? You do this every day? And I was like,
What are you trying to say? This is my job.
yeah, I was like, did I do that bad?
It's a simple question with a simple answer. This is my job.
Yes.
That's what I do. Let's see what else is on this. I don't want Jackie's efforts to go unused. What Better Homes and Gardens tools or brand information do you share to set yourself or a brokerage apart from other agents they might be interviewing?
I talk about pinpoint. Basic or something.
Pinpoint?
Yeah.
I don't even know what pinpoint is.
That's right? Pinpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm the only one in the room does not. know
It's
what
where you
pinpoint is.
can, hone in on a certain demographic or amount of money they make, that kind of thing. And say that you're gonna mail postcards to these people because they might be a good buyer for your.
So targeted marketing, I didn't know it's called pinpoint.
It's not free.
Right.
Point isn't it? Like you pay for the search or for the list, not for the search, but for the list the first time, and then you can use it as much.
Anything else? I like text BHGRE. I mean, it's just something unique and different that we have.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's really effective, I can't prove that to them, but it's just something different that we offer. Do you include any stats or market data where you are, when you're at the listing presentation value? Your years, how many years you've been in the business, how many properties you sold, are you a resume, a bio about yourself, including in there?
I do the opposite, I guess, because I'm new.
That's okay.
So I just say I'm basically like I'm new, and I just stress like hunger.
How ambitious you would be
Yeah,
because you're
yeah.
new.
Yeah.
Use it to your advantage.
Yes.
Well, then you have a wealth of knowledge around.
Well, yes, that too. If
Yeah, I did tell
like,
Skylar.
I'll tell people I don't have a Rolodex, and I may not have been in many situations or what have you, whatever their question is, but I'll find somebody who will know. That's my thing. Is I may not know, but I'll get somebody who knows, or I will find out who knows. Like,
Yeah.
I did tell him to
It
say
is
like,
the resource. It is.
I did tell Skylar to say like, when someone asks like, how many homes have you sold? How long you been in the business? You say like, me and my wife have been in the business for, me and my wife have sold X amount of houses,
Sure.
So you're not real.
If you're on a team, if you're on a team or a group of people, well, our team has sold 250 houses in the last year.
Yeah.
Because every new agent has to start someplace.
yeah. Well, I came home and told her about I had an open house. Not to go on a tangent, but I just had an open house, and it was going great. And they asked me how long I've been in the business, and I told them I just had my year, and they were kind of like, meh. Like they just completely.
Feel the mood change.
Oh yeah, like they might as well, just turn around and walked out of the house because it was.
Well, but instead maybe say, so happy you asked. In my first year, I was one of the top 1%. I sold 16 houses, or I sold 14 houses. The average is 2. The average realtor sells 7 houses, and I nearly tripled that my first year. It's been amazing. Can't wait for what else is gonna.
You're young, you're ambitious.
That's
I mean, that's the truth.
Sounds
I
great.
mean, I don't think you want to focus on the duration. I think you want to focus on the success.
And the benefits of that, which is you're not burnt out, you don't have bad habits, you're young.
Yes.
You're young.
Yes. You driving it.
Yes, you know technology,
Yes.
that stuff comes easy to you. I'm still fighting with all. So there are some advantages to being, you don't know, you don't have this voice in the back of your mind talking you out of doing things because you've been in real estate for 2 years. You didn't have.
And if somebody's holding 22 listings and you're holding 2, and you're uber focused on that,
That's a great
Give them a lot
point.
more attention.
they get more attention. And I think that's a reasonable, you have to really be careful about threading that needle between availability and experience and not being over saturated, because a lot of times I think people, they want to hire that name, whatever that name is, all companies have them. But in the peak of the season in June and July, I wonder if that experience is as good for certain people that have, I'm not all people, but that have all that volume condensed into that period of time versus somebody who's very competent, hungry and what have you. That, I think you have to be careful because that can backfire on you, but there is a way to thread that.
Perfect.
Skylar, what Tom is saying is exactly right, but add on to that, that you probably appreciate their business more than somebody who's got 20
Great.
listings.
Well said.
They may want to help you. I would be a sucker for a new person that I think really wants my listing and is gonna work hard and be excited about it, as opposed to somebody like me. So I would.
For example,
I think most of us.
not in real estate, that this has to do with the baby, but it correlates perfectly to this, is that for this baby, we chose a doctor to deliver this baby, Jamie Seaman, which is very well known in the baby world. She works with Jay Morales on the 50-mile march and stuff, and she's kind of like a famous doctor per se in the area. And I was like, oh, she's gonna be the best doctor for our baby. So we chose her. Well, now I'm almost 34, 35 weeks pregnant and I haven't met her once. She's so busy, I haven't met her once. So she's gonna deliver my baby and I've never met her. She doesn't know me from, as far as she can throw me. And so that's kind of what Tom's saying, is that, maybe someone that, is new and hungry.
I think you can sell them on that. I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when all
You
else
absolutely
fails,
say, look.
at your commission.
I have an
you're
open
gonna
house.
get
4%.
Did you learn anything?
Yeah.
I don't think you'll have to negotiate.
On that note, Jay has summed it up.
Yeah.
Much learned.
Almost.
Yeah, lot learned here today.
It's a one-on-one after this.
When Darla and I were talking earlier about all the additional things that you have to become an expert in, make sure they're aware of those, especially if they apply to their property. We were talking about flood elevations, flood certificates, amended flood certifications. I mean, just all these other things that if you have been involved in them at some point in time, share that knowledge with them. We're problem solvers. You're in the business of A, preventing problems, and then B, fixing them when they occur. That's what makes the transaction go smoothly, is being able to see what's coming up.
That's such a phenomenal point that you just made, is that in the listing presentation, for you to be able to veer off in a couple areas of expertise relative to experience. Even Skylar, contracting, you built a lot of stuff, the ability to hone in on something that will demonstrate really substantial competency. That
Failed septic systems,
Yeah.
bad water tests, I mean, any of that stuff.
that diffuses
Somebody
a
with
lot.
zero experience panics in that situation.
Yeah, that diffuses a lot of the uncertainty, because when you're able to go in a very modest, not unassuming way, that screams expert. You've got like flashing neon expert sign above your head. And guess what? We're willing to pay a premium or at least high end of the market for an expert. We're willing to pay nothing for. I remember like it was yesterday. I was out at Huntington Park and I was listing this house, and the guy said, and I was taking it from a CBS home agent, it's like 20 years ago. And the guy said, well, your company only has 7 people, so I'll only pay you 4.5%. But
What?
I would pay them 6%. I said, no, it doesn't work that way. We got the internet, we got, all this stuff where there's no differentiation. Doesn't matter. All the realtors are gonna see it, it's a free. I could not convince that guy. I mean, I walked away from it because I didn't want to do it for him. So it was
Economies
just,
of scale, that doesn't even
Yeah.
make sense.
yeah, but it was just something else. I mean, so you do have to, but had I done a better job of demonstrating my expert knowledge, I probably could have circumvented his argument.
It's everything. I mean, having contractor knowledge is excellent, but it's everything from, are they gonna use this property as a rental? What are the rules for rental registration? There's so many little things that as you gain experience in each one of them, that's just another feather in your cap, another thing that adds value to you and what you charge. that's all I have for you guys. Do you have any questions, comments? I mean, it's an open discussion here.
Thank you, Carrie.
I appreciate
That was
your
good.
time.
Important topic.